The assessment overview shows that addition and subtraction is the strongest area, while backward number word sequence and grouping are the weakest. If you listen to the explanations throughout the assessment, though, you can clearly hear, particularly for the grouping, that while some of this might not yet be knowledge, she is developing very good strategies for grouping numbers and seeing the relationships between them. Looking at all the information as a whole and thinking about how each of the areas connects to and impacts on the others, rather than teaching them all discretely, the following next steps might be useful. The number word before to 10 could be explored in a variety of ways, including contexts the pupil is familiar with and those that they may benefit from more experience with. Estimating, an essential skill to develop, which also helps overall number sense and later lets us get a feel for whether the answers to our calculations are right or wrong, would be a useful context to explore this in. The pupil could be briefly shown a collection of items, for example coins or sweets or toy dinosaurs, and asked how many they think there are. After they've made their estimate, they could count the items out, placing them on either something like a numeral track to confirm the quantity, or something familiar like a tens frame. This could be followed up with questions like, what would be one more and what would be one less? It could be explored through questionnaire rods and either using the same language, one more, one less, or altering the question slightly to build connections with the language. For example, what's the number before 6? What would the next number after 6 be? Can you find this piece? Can you prove that it's the next number after? This helps build the connection between one more, one less, and the number after or before. You could flash a tens frame to a pupil, for example the 7, and ask them how many dots there were altogether. How many were on top? How many were on the bottom? This will help them to later develop their addition and subtraction facts within 10. You could then ask them, if they took one away, how many would there be now? This would be supporting their number word before knowledge, but you could also ask them, after you removed the counter, how many were there on the top and the bottom now? So you can establish where they removed it from, and ask if they could have done it a different way. This is strengthening their overall number sense. Similar things could be done with dice patterns and other materials, as well as just oral counting games. Some of those were explored in other Next Steps videos. In terms of asking pupils to order and sequence numerals, consider the ways in which you are asking pupils to do this. Is it always in a horizontal form, or are we exploring other ways that pupils might encounter this in their environment, such as a circular sequence, like on a clock, or in a vertical way, such as a thermometer? While the number range might be slightly different, it is good for pupils to become familiar with different representations. You could extend this by either turning over cards or removing them, and asking pupils to figure out which numerals go where and how they know. This is again exploring ideas and concepts related to the number before and the number after. In terms of grouping in place value, it would be good to skew groupings to 5, but look at this alongside other activities that will help to build addition and subtraction facts, both to and within 5, as opposed to just repeated exposure to a 5 frame, which was the item on the assessment. This could include activities like creating collections of 5 and exploring patterns and relationships when doing this with 2 or more colours. This could be combined with both verbal explanations of the patterns and written recording of what they see. Other representations such as questionnaire rods, numicon shapes, or pegs could be used. Games like Snap It and Dotty 2, which have been mentioned in other videos, would also be useful. Stories and nursery rhymes are another great source for exploring maths in meaningful and engaging contexts. The story, 1 is a snail, 10 is a crab, might be a nice way to explore different groupings. The pupils could, for example, then explore how they can make groups of 5 or 7 or 6 feet using different animals of their choosing. For example, 4 feet plus 2 feet equals 6 feet. Can combinations of animals with different numbers of feet produce the same total? This idea came from the Ericsson Institute, which has lots of great ideas for developing early-level concepts through stories and other means in order to build good foundations in numeracy and maths. In terms of the teen-T confusion, this can in part be addressed through modelling the correct word when the pupil makes the mistake, as well as highlighting to them the differences in terms of how the teen and T words sound, as well as how they feel and look in terms of the shape their mouth is making. The pupil demonstrated they could count to numbers beyond 30, so this could be used to support their understanding of the difference in size between these numbers, as well as addressing the teen-T confusion. Pupils could be asked to count a collection of 13 and also 30, and then asked to place the numerals underneath each collection before discussing the similarities and differences between both the size of the collections and the way the numerals are written. The pupil could then be provided with opportunities with Numicon or Questionnaire, where patterns and relationships could be seen more easily, depending on how they are structured. For example, asking the pupils to build the numbers 1 to 10, and then 11 to 20, which might result in a sequence like this, although other pupils may organise this differently, which could also be discussed. In this format, we can see more easily that with the teen numbers, there is this repeating pattern of tens. If pupils are encouraged to place the numeral underneath in both words and digits, they might also see other patterns, such as the repeating teens, and therefore connecting this to the tens, and also the one that keeps repeating in 13, 14, 15, and so on. By organising the equipment slightly differently, you start to see different relationships. For example, here, pupils might notice that the 110 and the 2 ones, or 110 and 3 ones, match the order in which the digits are written when the numeral is written down. Alongside these activities, you could also be asking, what's the number before and after? And in time, the pupil could be doing this by just seeing the numerals alone, for example in a hide-and-seek flipboard, as mentioned in a previous video, as well as just orally. When appropriate, these activities could all be extended to exploring the patterns and relationships with more of the T numbers, and seeing that the T relates to multiple groups of 10. For example, 20 is 2 tens, 30 is 3 tens, and so on. This could then be extended again to other 2-digit numbers, and a similar combination of activities, including concrete materials, visuals, and just numbers alone, could be explored, as well as making links to the number before and after. In terms of the pupil's addition and subtraction, the next steps would be to support the pupil to add or subtract 2 small numbers by imaging, and not needing to use the physical materials to count all the way from 1. The pupil does appear to be imaging her fingers, and so can solve problems like this when the total is less than 10. However, she may have difficulty when the larger collections are beyond her finger range. Developing this could be done by showing the pupils combinations of regular patterns and asking them how many there were altogether. The regular patterns mean they're more likely to remember how many were there, and therefore be more likely to be able to count the collection even when it's no longer visible. The pupil may still count from 1, and this is fine. We're just trying to encourage them to do this without needing to see the materials at this stage. For subtraction, you could build and establish the total in a set, screen them, and then initially just work on removing 1 item and asking how many now. When they're ready, you could progress to moving 2 or 3. Again, we're just expecting pupils to use counting strategies, and they may do this by trying to count up in ones from 1, although they may try to use a more efficient strategy too. It is important not to rush pupils through these stages and provide them with experiences to ultimately develop the ability to count on and back, rather than just telling them to put the bigger number in their head. Pupils that are taught this procedure but haven't necessarily had a chance to make sense of it may frequently be incorrect in their calculations by just 1. This may be as a result of not really knowing where to start their count, because by just being told what to do with the numbers as opposed to actually seeing what happens with physical objects, they may not have a concept as to whether they're supposed to start their count at the number they've been told to put in their head, or whether they're supposed to start their count at the number just before or just after this. Other activities such as tug of war can be good to help pupils make sense of this concept, as well as exploring the relationship between addition and subtraction. The game can be found on the Enrich website and also on the Highland Numeracy blog, as we've made adaptations to it. Auditory or sensory activities can also be useful to develop these skills. For example, establishing the quantity in a given collection and placing this into a container, like a tin, and then dropping additional items in and varying your questioning depending on what you're trying to target. For example, listen as I drop these in the tin and tell me how many extra items are put in. Or after establishing how many are already there, as I drop some more in, I want you to tell me how many there are altogether now. As pupils become more proficient, you can ask them to answer both questions. This helps them to develop the skill of counting on, while also keeping track of the count. As pupils move through the early and first one-star levels of addition and subtraction, pupils' numeral identification and forward and backward number word sequences are likely to have a larger impact on this, particularly when it comes to counting on and counting back. In order to count on and back, pupils need to have a strong sense of the number word after and before, without needing to have a run-up to these numbers. Providing a range of activities such as the ones coming up in these slides, which are taken from training sessions we deliver, can help pupils. Pause the video if you want to spend longer looking at each slide. It would be important, wherever possible, to put this all into meaningful contexts for the children, as well as exploring it through stories. When moving on to first one-star, it is important to support the pupils to develop depth and understanding. This includes exploring addition by counting on, but also through missing number problems, and subtraction by counting down from and counting down to, and exploring it as a difference, as opposed to just take away. This will support the pupil in the long run, as they should have a better depth and understanding, rather than rushing onto concepts at first two-star. It's important to keep in mind that all the work you do at earlier levels builds the foundation for future work, so it's important to make sure this is secure and pupils have a thorough understanding and can apply this in a variety of contexts.